Have you ever stood in a moment where the very person who crushed your spirit becomes the one desperately seeking what only you can give? This story explores the raw power of humiliation transformed into grace, where a young woman's faith becomes the only lifeline for someone who once mocked everything she held sacred. It's about the moments when God uses our deepest wounds to become channels of his most profound healing. The brass doorknob felt cold beneath Grace Whitmore's trembling fingers as she stood before the imposing mahogany door of the Blackstone estate. 22 years old, with honey-blonde hair pulled back beneath a crisp white cap. She wore the traditional navy dress and white apron that marked her new position as household staff. Her grandmother's worn leather prayer journal pressed against her ribs, tucked safely inside her uniform pocket, its presence a small comfort in this moment of new beginnings. Victoria Blackstone answered the door herself, a deliberate choice that immediately established the power dynamic. At 43, she carried herself with the sharp elegance of a corporate executive who had clawed her way to success without anyone's help, least of all from what she called the opiate of the masses. Her tailored black suit cost more than Grace would earn in 3 months, and she made sure the younger woman noticed, letting her dark eyes travel slowly over the modest uniform before speaking. "You must be the new help," Victoria said, her voice carrying the kind of cultured disdain that could slice through steel. "I trust the agency explained my expectations. I run a secular household. No grace before meals, no religious trinkets, and absolutely no proselytizing to my guests. Your faith, whatever it may be, stays at that door. Understood?" Grace nodded, her throat tight. "Yes, ma'am." "Good. You'll address me as Miss Blackstone." "Not ma'am, not miss, and certainly not by my first name. I work too hard for my position to be diminished by informality." Victoria stepped aside, allowing Grace to enter. "Your duties begin immediately. The Whitman Foundation Gala is tonight. 200 of the city's most influential people will be here, and everything must be perfect." The mansion's interior took Grace's breath away despite her anxiety. Marble columns stretched toward vaulted ceilings. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow patterns across Italian tile, and original artwork adorned walls that seemed to whisper of old money and older secrets. Yet for all its beauty, the house felt cold, like a museum where no one truly lived. Grace spent the morning learning the elaborate table settings, the specific way Victoria wanted the napkins folded, swans, never fans, and the precise temperature for serving each course. The other staff members, a cook named Rosa and a gardener called Thomas, moved through their duties with practiced silence, offering Grace sympathetic glances but no words of encouragement. They had learned, it seemed, that Victoria's keen hearing picked up even whispered conversations. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Grace was polishing silver when she heard Victoria on the phone in the adjacent study. The door stood slightly ajar, and Victoria's voice carried clearly. "Of course I terminated her contract, Richard. The fool actually asked for time off for some religious holiday. Easter, I think, as if I care about their fairy tales." A pause. "No, the new one seems properly cowed. Young, desperate for work. She won't cause problems." Grace's hand stilled on the serving spoon she was polishing. Through the gap in the door, she could see Victoria seated at her desk, her back to the doorway. The irony is delicious, really. These Christians claim their God provides, yet here they are, scrubbing my floors for minimum wage. Where's their divine providence now? Victoria laughed, a sound like ice cracking. "At least this one's pretty enough to serve drinks without embarrassing me. Though I swear, if I see her lips moving in prayer even once, she's gone." The words cut deep, but Grace continued polishing, her movements mechanical. She thought of her grandmother's words, written in that precious journal. "Child, sometimes God places us in Egypt not despite our faith, but because of it. Joseph's chains led to Pharaoh's throne room. Your chains might lead to someone's salvation." By 7 o'clock, the house transformed into a glittering stage for Seattle's elite. Women in designer gowns air-kissed, while men in tuxedos discussed stock portfolios and political connections. Grace moved among them like a ghost, refilling champagne flutes and offering canapés, invisible until needed. She was navigating through the crowd with a full tray of drinks when it happened. A gentleman stepped backward without looking, his elbow catching the edge of her tray. Time seemed to slow as 20 glasses of red wine launched into the air, their contents creating crimson arcs across the white marble floor and horrifically across the Versace gown of Judge Catherine Pembridge, one of Victoria's most important guests. The room fell silent. 200 pairs of eyes turned toward Grace, who stood frozen, the empty tray still in her hands. The judge shrieked, pulling at her ruined $8,000 dress, while her husband fumbled with napkins that only seemed to make the stains worse. Victoria materialized beside Grace like an avenging angel, her face a mask of controlled fury that promised retribution. But it was the smile that frightened Grace most, a cold curve of lips that suggested Victoria had been waiting for exactly this opportunity. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria announced, her voice carrying across the hushed room, "I must apologize for this inexcusable clumsiness. Rest assured, this person will be dealt with appropriately." She turned to Grace, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "On your knees." Grace blinked, certain she had misheard. "I'm sorry? You heard me. On your knees. Clean up your mess. That's what servants do, isn't it? Or does your God exempt you from consequences?" Victoria's eyes glittered with malicious pleasure. "Unless you'd prefer to leave immediately without your pay or reference?" Grace's cheeks burned as she slowly sank to her knees on the cold marble, using the cloth from her apron to soak up the spreading wine. The guests watched in uncomfortable silence, some turning away, others recording on their phones. She heard someone whisper, "Isn't this a bit much?" only to be silenced by Victoria's sharp look. "You know what the problem is with your kind," Victoria continued, circling Grace as she worked. "You think suffering makes you noble. You think poverty is a virtue. But look at you, literally on your knees. And where's your divine intervention now? Where's your loving God when you need him?" Grace's hands trembled as she wrung out her apron into a bucket Rosa had quietly brought. Wine stained her uniform, her knees ached against the hard floor, and tears threatened to spill. But as she worked, words from her grandmother's journal floated through her mind. Humiliation is just pride leaving the body, making room for grace to enter. "I asked you a question," Victoria pressed. "Where is your God now?" Grace looked up, meeting Victoria's gaze steadily despite the tears tracking down her cheeks. "He's here," she said quietly. "He's always here, even in this." Victoria's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "How pathetically delusional. Get up. You're done for the night. Report to the kitchen and stay there until the guests leave. I don't want to see your face again this evening." As Grace stood, Judge Pembridge stepped forward. "Victoria, really, it was an accident. The gentleman bumped into her." "The gentleman is a valued donor to your campaign, Catherine. The girl is replaceable. Which would you prefer I address?" Victoria's tone brooked no argument, and the judge retreated, cowed. Grace spent the remaining 4 hours of the party in the kitchen, helping Rosa wash dishes and trying not to think about the videos that were probably already circulating online. Thomas came in once, patting her shoulder awkwardly and mumbling something about Victoria being worse than usual tonight. When the last guest finally left at midnight, Victoria appeared in the kitchen doorway. "You're still here. I'm almost impressed. Most would have run." "I need this job, Miss Blackstone," Grace said simply. "Yes, you do." Victoria studied her with those cold, dark eyes. "Which is why you'll accept what happened tonight without complaint. Consider it a lesson in reality. Your faith didn't protect you from humiliation, did it? Your prayers didn't stop those glasses from falling. You cling to fairy tales while the real world crushes you beneath its heel." Grace said nothing, but her hand found the shape of the journal in her pocket. Victoria noticed the gesture. "What's that?" What are you hiding? Before Grace could respond, Victoria had crossed the room and pulled the journal from her pocket. She flipped it open, scanning the handwritten pages with increasing disdain. "Trust in the Lord with all your heart," she read, mockingly. "He works all things for good. How quaint. This is your grandmother's, isn't it? Let me guess, she died poor but faithful?" Victoria tossed the journal onto the counter. "Keep your delusions if they comfort you. Just remember, in my house, reality reigns. Be here at 6 tomorrow morning. The real work begins then." After Victoria left, Grace carefully retrieved the journal, smoothing its pages. One entry caught her eye, one she hadn't read in months. "Grace, my darling girl, one day God will use your greatest humiliation as the door to someone's salvation. When that day comes, you must walk through it with forgiveness already in your heart." The next 3 days passed in a blur of demanding tasks and subtle cruelties. Victoria seemed to take particular pleasure in scheduling Grace's breaks during mealtimes, ensuring she couldn't eat properly, and assigning her the most degrading tasks. Clean the bathroom floors with a toothbrush, reorganize the library by color rather than subject, then change it back again. Iron sheets that would be immediately replaced. On the 4th night, Grace was preparing Victoria's evening tea when she heard a crash from the master bedroom. She ran upstairs to find Victoria collapsed on the floor, her body convulsing, foam at the corners of her mouth. Grace immediately called 911, staying with Victoria, turning her on her side, cushioning her head with pillows. The paramedics arrived within minutes, but their faces were grim as they worked. "Severe allergic reaction," one said. "But to what? Ma'am, can you tell us what she's allergic to?" Grace didn't know. Victoria's medical information was private, locked in files Grace had never seen. As they loaded Victoria onto a gurney, she was barely conscious, her breathing labored despite the oxygen mask. "Are you family?" the paramedic asked Grace. "I'm her. I work for her. She needs someone at the hospital. Can you come?" Grace rode in the ambulance, watching as Victoria's vitals fluctuated wildly. The powerful woman who had humiliated her just days ago now looked small and fragile, her skin taking on a greyish pallor that made Grace's stomach clench with unexpected concern. At the hospital, doctors swarmed around Victoria's gurney, shouting medical terms Grace didn't understand. She was shuttled to a waiting room where she sat for 3 hours, praying silently despite everything, until a doctor finally emerged. "Are you Grace Whitmore?" he asked, looking exhausted. "Yes, sir. Miss Blackstone is asking for you. I should warn you, she's not doing well. We've managed to stop the initial reaction, but there's been complications, organ involvement. We're doing everything we can, but—" He trailed off. "She's in room 314. Grace found Victoria connected to multiple machines, their beeping creating an arrhythmic symphony. Victoria's eyes were open, wide with something Grace had never seen in them before. Fear. "You came," Victoria whispered, her voice hoarse. "Of course I came." Victoria tried to laugh but ended up coughing. "Even after everything?" Grace pulled a chair close to the bed. "Even after everything?" For a long moment, Victoria just stared at her, as if trying to solve a puzzle. "They say I might not make it through the night. Something about my liver, my kidneys. Medical words that all mean the same thing. I'm dying. The doctors are doing everything they can." "Stop." Victoria's hand moved slightly on the blanket. "Don't patronize me. I've spent my whole life reading people, and I can read the truth in their eyes. I'm dying, and I'm—" She paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "I'm terrified." Grace reached out and gently took Victoria's hand. It was cold, trembling. "All my life," Victoria continued, "I believed in control, in power, in the tangible. I mocked faith because I couldn't quantify it, couldn't manage it, couldn't buy it. But now, lying here watching those numbers on the machines get worse, I realize I can't control this. I can't negotiate with death. I can't leverage my way out of whatever comes next." Her eyes filled with tears, shocking Grace with their vulnerability. "What if you're right? What if there is something after? What if there's judgment? I've done terrible things, Grace, not just to you, to so many people. I climbed to success on the backs of those I crushed. I took pride in my cruelty, called it strength. Miss Blackstone, Victoria, please, I think I've forfeited the right to formality. Victoria's grip tightened slightly. That journal, your grandmother's journal, you wrote in it that night after the party. I saw you in the kitchen writing. What did you write? Grace hesitated. I wrote that God was preparing something, that he doesn't waste our pain. I wasted mine, Victoria whispered. My father left when I was 7. My mother drank herself to death by the time I was 15. Foster homes, group homes. I decided early that if God existed, he was cruel, so I would be crueler. I would win by his own rules. A sob escaped her. But what if I was wrong? What if he wasn't cruel? Just what if I missed it all? The machines began beeping more urgently. A nurse rushed in, checked the readings and rushed out again. Victoria's breathing became more labored. Grace, she gasped, I know I have no right. I know I've mocked everything you believe, but I'm scared. I'm so scared. Would you pray? Not for healing. I think we're past that. But I don't know, for mercy, for forgiveness, for courage to face whatever's coming. Grace felt tears streaming down her face. This woman who had humiliated her, who had stripped her dignity in front of hundreds, who had mocked her faith ruthlessly, was now begging for the very thing she had scorned. I don't even know how, Victoria continued desperately. I haven't prayed since I was 7, the night my father left. I prayed he would come back. When he didn't, I never prayed again. I don't remember how. Please, Grace, please. Grace stood, still holding Victoria's hand, and placed her other hand gently on Victoria's forehead. Father God, she began, her voice soft but clear, I come to you tonight not with my own words, but with a heart full of forgiveness and a plea for your mercy. Victoria's eyes closed, tears seeping from beneath her lids. Lord, you know Victoria. You've known her since before she was formed in her mother's womb. You saw the little girl whose father left, whose mother couldn't stay. You saw her pain turn to armor, her hurt turn to hardness. You never stopped loving her, even when she stopped believing in you. The room seemed to fill with a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. Grace felt it, and from the way Victoria's expression changed, she felt it too. Father, Victoria is afraid. She's standing at the threshold of eternity, and she doesn't know what awaits her. But you do. You are the God of second chances, of 11th-hour mercy, of grace that makes no sense to our human minds. You are the God who welcomed the thief on the cross, who had hours, maybe minutes, to recognize you. Victoria's hand squeezed Grace's tighter. She's sorry, Lord. Sorry for the pain she's caused, the faith she's mocked, the love she's rejected. But you don't require perfect apologies. You just require honest hearts, and right now her heart is more honest than it's been in 36 years. Grace felt words flowing through her that didn't seem entirely her own. Lord, I forgive her. Completely, for the humiliation, the cruelty, the mockery. I forgive it all, and I ask you to forgive her too, not because she deserves it, but because that's who you are. You are forgiveness itself, love itself, mercy itself. A strange peace settled over Victoria's face. Her breathing, while still labored, seemed less panicked. If it's your will, Lord, heal her body, but more importantly, heal her soul. Give her the peace that passes understanding. Give her the assurance that you are not the cruel God she imagined, but the loving Father she needed all along. Show her that it's not too late. It's never too late while there's breath. Grace opened her eyes to find Victoria looking at her with wonder. I feel different, Victoria whispered. Warm, like being held. That's him, Grace said softly. That's what his presence feels like. Victoria's eyes widened suddenly. The pain, She took a deeper breath than she had in hours. It's less. The nurse returned, checking the monitors with increasing confusion. This doesn't make sense. Your oxygen levels are improving. Your blood pressure is stabilizing." She called for the doctor, who arrived within minutes. After a series of tests, he stood back, shaking his head. "I can't explain it medically. The organ failure indicators are reversing. It's not possible, but it's happening." Victoria kept her eyes on Grace. "You know what this is, don't you?" Grace smiled through her tears. "I know who this is." Over the next 6 hours, Victoria's condition improved dramatically. By dawn, she was sitting up, eating broth. Her color returned to normal. The doctors ran test after test, finding no explanation for either the severity of her reaction or her miraculous recovery. On the second day, as Grace sat reading her grandmother's journal aloud to Victoria, a passage struck them both. "Sometimes God allows us to reach the edge of death, not to punish us, but to show us what life really means. Every breath after that moment is a gift, a chance to live differently." "Your grandmother was wise," Victoria said quietly. "Grace, I need to tell you something. These past 2 days you've shown me more genuine love than I've experienced in 20 years. After how I treated you, you should have let me die alone. Most would have. I'm not most people. I'm a Christian. Forgiveness isn't optional for us." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "I want to learn about faith, about forgiveness, about God. Would you teach me?" "I'm just a maid who dropped 20 glasses of wine," Grace said with a small smile. "No," Victoria said firmly. "You're a woman whose faith survived my worst cruelty and still had enough love left to pray for my soul. That's the kind of strength I want to understand." They were interrupted by a knock at the door. Judge Pembridge entered, carrying a tablet. "Victoria, I thought you should see this." She turned the screen toward them, showing a video from the party. But it wasn't just the humiliation scene. Someone had filmed the aftermath too. Grace in the kitchen, quietly praying while washing dishes, tears on her face, but peace in her expression. "It's gone viral," the judge said. "The contrast between how you treated her and how she responded. The comments are, well, they're calling her a saint and you a monster. I thought you should know before you leave the hospital." Victoria watched the video, seeing herself through the world's eyes for the first time. "They're not wrong. I was a monster." She looked at Grace. "How do I make this right?" "You don't have to make anything right with me. I've already forgiven you." "But the public—" "Since when has Victoria Blackstone cared what the public thinks?" Grace asked with a slight smile. Victoria laughed, a real laugh this time, warm and genuine. "You're right, but I care what God thinks now, and I care what you think." A week later, Victoria was released from the hospital. She returned to her mansion to find Grace had maintained everything perfectly in her absence. But more than that, she had left small touches of warmth throughout the house. Fresh flowers in vases, windows open to let in light, soft music playing in the background. "It felt too cold before," Grace explained. "Houses should feel like homes." Victoria stood in her foyer, looking around as if seeing it for the first time. "You're right. It was a museum to my success. Empty, cold, lifeless." She turned to Grace. "Like I was." That evening, they sat together in the kitchen, not as employer and employee, but as two women sharing tea and conversation. Victoria had a notebook out, writing down questions about faith, about the Bible, about prayer. "I have 43 years of skepticism to overcome," she said. "It won't be easy. Faith rarely is, but it's worth it." Victoria was quiet for a moment, then pulled out an envelope. "This is for you." Grace opened it to find a check for $50,000. She gasped. "Victoria, I can't. It's not charity, it's restitution, for the humiliation, for the cruelty, for the mockery. I know money can't undo what I did, but it's a start. I don't need your money. I told you I've forgiven you. Then consider it an investment. Use it for college. You're too intelligent to remain a maid. Unless—" Victoria hesitated. "Unless you'd consider a different position. I need a personal assistant, someone I trust, someone who can keep me accountable to this new path I'm trying to walk. The salary would be substantial, and you could attend night school." Grace set down her teacup. "Can I pray about it?" Victoria smiled, a genuine, warm smile that transformed her face. "I'm learning that's always the right answer." 3 months later, Victoria stood before the same crowd that had witnessed Grace's humiliation. But this time it was Victoria who commanded the microphone at a charity benefit she had organized. "Many of you were here the night I publicly humiliated a young woman for an accident that wasn't even her fault," she began. "You watched me force her to her knees, mock her faith, and strip her of dignity for your entertainment. Some of you were uncomfortable. None of you stopped me." The room was silent, uncomfortable. "That young woman is here tonight, not as my maid, but as my assistant, my teacher, and dare I say, my friend. Grace Whitmore showed me what real strength looks like. It looks like forgiveness when you have every right to hatred. It looks like prayer for someone who mocked your God. It looks like love when you've received only cruelty." Victoria found Grace in the crowd, their eyes meeting. 3 months ago, I nearly died. The doctors called my recovery miraculous. I call it what it was, an answer to prayer. Not my prayer, because I didn't know how to pray, but hers. Grace prayed for the woman who humiliated her, and God answered. She paused, letting the words sink in. "I've spent my career teaching you all that power comes from stepping on others to rise higher. I was wrong. Real power comes from lifting others up, even when they've pushed you down. Real strength comes from faith, even when that faith is mocked. Real success comes from love, even when that love isn't earned." The speech continued, but Grace barely heard it. She was thinking of her grandmother's journal, of an entry she had discovered just that morning. "My darling Grace, your name is your destiny. You will be the Grace someone needs when they least deserve it. And in that moment, heaven will touch earth through your forgiveness." After the speech, as the crowd mingled with a different energy than before, Victoria found Grace on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. "I've been thinking," Victoria said, "about that night in the hospital. When you prayed, you said God knew me before I was formed in my mother's womb. Do you really believe that?" "I do." "Then he knew I would hurt you. He knew I would humiliate you. He knew all of it would happen." Grace nodded. "And he knew it would lead to this moment, to your salvation, to your transformation, to a testimony that will impact everyone who hears it." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. "Your grandmother's journal. You wrote something new in it yesterday. I saw you. What did you write?" Grace smiled. "I wrote that God's timing is perfect, that he used my humiliation as the key to unlock your heart, that what the enemy meant for evil, God used for good." "The enemy?" "Your pain, your anger, your fear. The real enemy was never you, Victoria. It was the lie that told you God didn't love you." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "I spent so many years believing that lie." But you don't believe it anymore?" "No," Victoria said softly. "I don't. How could I when he sent me you?" They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the city lights twinkle below. Inside, the party continued, but out here in this moment, two women who should have been enemies stood as sisters in faith, proof that grace could bridge any gap, heal any wound, and transform any heart. A year later, Victoria was baptized in a small church in downtown Seattle. Grace stood as her sponsor, watching as the woman who had once forced her to her knees now willingly knelt before God and rose as a new creation. The congregation was small, mostly people from the recovery groups Victoria had started funding, the homeless shelter she now volunteered at, the prison ministry she supported. After the service, Victoria showed Grace a journal she had started keeping. The first entry read, "Today I was reborn. Not because I deserve it, but because grace showed me grace, and through her I met grace himself." "You capitalize grace when you write about me," Grace noticed with a smile. "Because you were his grace to me," Victoria replied. "You were the sermon I needed to hear, lived out in front of me even when it hurt." As they left the church together, Victoria stopped suddenly. "Grace, I never asked you something. That night at the party, when I humiliated you. Why didn't you quit? Why didn't you leave?" Grace was quiet for a moment, then pulled out her grandmother's journal, now worn even more from constant use. She flipped to a page near the back. "The night before I started working for you, I couldn't sleep. I was praying about whether to take the job. I knew your reputation. I knew you were hostile to faith. I opened this journal randomly, and this is what I read." She showed Victoria the entry. "Grace, one day you will face your greatest humiliation. It will break you down to nothing, but in that breaking, you will become the bridge someone needs to cross from death to life. Don't run from that moment. Embrace it. Your humiliation will be someone's salvation." Victoria stared at the words, written in faded ink years before either of them knew the other existed. "Your grandmother wrote that before she died. 7 years ago? Before I even knew your company existed, before you knew you would need a new maid, before any of this seemed possible. Then God really did orchestrate it all? Yes, even the painful parts. Especially the painful parts, because he knew that was the only way to reach your heart." Victoria pulled Grace into a tight embrace, something she never would have done a year ago. "Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for seeing past the monster to the broken woman underneath." Thank you for letting me," Grace replied. As they walked toward Victoria's car, now used more for driving to charity events than corporate takeovers, Victoria said, "I've been thinking about the foundation. I want to rename it." "Oh?" "The Grace Foundation, dedicated to helping women in crisis, women who've been humiliated, lost, broken, women who need to know that their worst moment doesn't define them." Grace stopped walking. "Victoria, that's beautiful, but you don't need to." "I want to. Every time someone is helped by that foundation, they'll ask about the name. And I'll tell them about the maid who showed me grace when I deserved judgment. I'll tell them about the God who used my cruelty to reveal his kindness. I'll tell them that no one is too far gone, too hard-hearted, too lost to be found." The sun was setting, painting the Seattle sky in shades of gold and crimson. It reminded Grace of spilled wine, but now the memory held no sting. It had become part of a larger story, a testament to the truth her grandmother had always taught her. God wastes nothing, not even our pain. "There's one more thing," Victoria said as they reached the car. She pulled out a small box. "This was my mother's, the only thing of value she left me. I've kept it locked away for 28 years, unable to look at it because it reminded me of loss. But now I want you to have it." Grace opened the box to find a simple gold cross on a delicate chain. It was beautiful, clearly old, with intricate engravings. "She wore it every day until she died," Victoria said. "Even when she was drinking, even when she was broken, she never took it off. I hated it because I thought it represented a God who didn't care. Now I know it represented a God who never stopped caring, even when we stopped believing." Grace lifted the necklace, and Victoria helped her fasten it around her neck. It lay perfectly against her uniform, the same uniform she still wore when working, though now by choice rather than necessity. "It's perfect," Grace said. "So is Grace," Victoria replied. "Perfectly timed, perfectly given, perfectly sufficient." As they drove toward the shelter where they would serve dinner together that evening, Grace thought about the journey from humiliation to redemption, from mockery to faith, from enemy to sister. She thought about her grandmother's prayers, written in that journal, prayers for a granddaughter she would never see grown, for situations she could never have imagined. But mostly, she thought about the mystery of grace, how it could take the worst moment of her life and transform it into the catalyst for someone else's salvation. How a spilled tray of wine could become the blood of new covenant. How kneeling in humiliation could become the posture of victory. Victoria glanced over at her. "What are you thinking about?" "Just that God really does work all things for good. Even the horrible things? Especially the horrible things. They become the compost for the most beautiful gardens." Victoria smiled. "Then we're growing quite a garden, aren't we?" "Yes," Grace said, touching the cross at her throat, feeling the weight of history and hope it carried. We really are. That night, as they served soup to homeless men and women, many of whom recognized Victoria from news stories about her transformation, Grace overheard a conversation that made her heart soar. "Is that really the Blackstone lady?" one man asked another. "The one who was so mean?" "Yeah, but she's different now. Found God or something. Nobody changes that much." The second man shrugged. "Maybe not, but I heard she nearly died, and that maid she was cruel to, she prayed for her anyway. If someone can forgive like that, maybe people can change like that too." Grace smiled, ladling soup while Victoria handed out bread. They worked in synchronized harmony, servant and served, teacher and student, saved and savior alternating with each interaction. Later that night, Grace wrote in her grandmother's journal, "Tonight, Victoria Blackstone served soup to the homeless with tears of joy in her eyes. The woman who once mocked servanthood has become a servant. The woman who rejected grace has become gracious. Lord, thank you for the mystery of redemption, for the way you use our deepest wounds to heal others. Thank you for the humiliation that became hallowed ground." She closed the journal and prepared for bed, knowing tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to show grace. But tonight, she rested in the knowledge that God had done what only He could do, taken the worst and made it best, taken the broken and made it beautiful, taken the humiliation and made it holy. In her mansion across the city, Victoria Blackstone knelt beside her bed, a practice she had adopted daily since leaving the hospital. Her prayers were still simple, sometimes halting, but they were sincere. "Lord," she prayed, "thank you for grace, both kinds. The girl who showed me yours, and yours that saved me through her. Help me never forget where I came from, never forget where you brought me to. And help me be to others what grace was to me, a bridge from darkness to light, from death to life, from hatred to love. Amen." As she rose from her knees, she noticed moonlight streaming through her window, illuminating the empty wine glasses on her dresser, the ones from that fateful night. She had kept them as reminders, but now she knew it was time to let them go. Tomorrow she would replace them with something new, communion cups for the Bible study she was starting in her home. The transformation was complete, but the journey had just begun, and somewhere Grace's grandmother was smiling, knowing her prayers had accomplished more than she could have asked or imagined, proving once again that in God's economy, nothing is wasted, especially not humiliation offered up with grace.